My expanded definition of pornography is anything that propagates an inaccurate paradigm or vision of what a healthy relationship should be like. One of these unhealthy dynamics is the phrase, and they lived happily ever after. It doesn't seem like a big deal. It doesn't seem like it should be that catastrophic. But as I've seen in my own marriage therapy sessions, I see a lot of people who are hoping to find that one idea, that one principle, that one concept, that one therapeutic tool that will make it so they can live happily ever after, right? That would be nice, but it doesn't seem to be the way God works. As I spent years and years studying the principles that have been brought to us by prophets, the principles that have been brought to us by ambitious and inspired scientists, it was quite a relief to discover that once again, God is representing something through a growth cycle that we can call the 4 seasons. Just as a short review, if you are in a healthy relationship, there will be a springtime. There will be a planting of a seed of possibility. There will be good ground. There will be nurturing environment. There will be warmth. There will be safety, and it will grow. In healthy relationships, there is a phase of summer when roots have sunk deep and the plant is strong and there's a harvest. There are many types of harvest in relationships. There is laughing, there is playing, there is building, there is our children, sometimes not. But the part that surprises people is that in every healthy relationship, there's also a fall. In every healthy relationship, there is also a fall. The reason there's a fall is because when 2 individuals are striving to be strong individuals, striving to be wise individuals. For those of you old timers who remember at family reunions when we would play that 3-legged race or the sack race, and you would try to get in harmony with a partner, and you tie your ankles and your legs to somebody, and you, for several steps, you might get rolling nicely, but it's all fun and games when we trip each other up and fall. Because there are so many elements of a relationship that can get out of harmony, it's expected that things will fall and deteriorate. And then there's a winter. We're going to cover this in more detail in a little bit, but in nature, when there's a winter, things go dormant, but they also become stronger. They also become healthier. They also grow on the inside in preparation for growing on the outside. When we meet people in therapy, and many people, one of the most common distorted ideas of how to work through relationship difficulties is to go back to the way things were before. There needs to be a rebirth, a regrowth, before you make another attempt at season 1 and fix it. We just need to go back and figure out what was wrong and fix it. Another common error in relationship repair after a bit of a hiccup is the idea that we should talk more together, that we should interact more together, we should talk it through together. Well, that's where Christ comes in. I don't know if any of you have ever done this where you try to convince Christ that it's too much of a project even for him. Okay? Some of you have done it as individuals. I'm too broken, not even God can fix me. My marriage is too broken, not even God can fix it. I had the privilege, my first 6 months in inner city Detroit, to live upstairs from a lady, white lady from the South. Apparently, Detroit is in the South, if you didn't know that, okay? And she was not LDS. She and I would talk the Bible. She was one of my best trainers for the Bible when I was a young man. And she introduced me to a term that I'd never heard before, at least I hadn't heard it in this terminology before, what it means to be born again. Now, I was tempted to argue with her that that was not a correct gospel principle until I actually studied my own religion. Oops, okay. Did you know that we, the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, actually believe in being born again? Who knew? Okay. I thought you had to be one of those people in order to believe in that concept. But may I share with you the psychological relief that came to me when it was shared that even all the broken damage you've caused so far and been a part of so far can be reborn. 10, 15 years later, as I'm observing in my office and amongst others, shattered marriages, broken relationships, damaged families. Of course, as I entered my profession, I had my roll of duct tape and my super glue, and I was ready to roll. And I was prepared to fix everything that came into my office until I had that humbling experience of finding out that you're not enough, Maurice. You're not enough. You're not going to be able to pull it off on your own. And I'm shaking my head and agonizing when, lo and behold, the same phrase comes to mind. A little help from Alma chapter 5. I know you've been born again before, but have you been born again lately? And I've already done that. Who knew that relationships could be born again? This concept changed everything for me. The desperation to gather all the shattered pieces of glass, to put them together like a jigsaw puzzle, to tape them and glue them. I could now rest my mind as a clinician, as a servant of God, so that I could now serve the people in a way that actually produced results. Sometimes people come to me and say, what are the chances, now that you've met us, what are the chances that this marriage can be raised from the dead? We hope to provide you with a few principles and tools today so that you will be able to experience the Lazarus experience for your marriage so it can be born again. Now, to understand how this works, we need to go back in time to how we wish we had done it the first time. One of the first tools I want to give you or recommend you start using is, for the women, we call it Handbook for My Daughter. For the men, we call it Handbook for My Son. This is where you write down all of the wisdom you have gained since you growed up. I know some of you who are over 40 still don't feel growed up, but we're just going to call it growed up. Now, if you're a normal human, you're going to go, I don't need to do that because I'm so smart, I can hold it all in my head. Please, I recommend you get some type of a journal, whether it's a finger journal, otherwise known as a computer, where you just tap on the keys with your fingers. Some of you use thumb journals, okay, where you use your thumb to write in your journals. Others do the old-fashioned way where you write down. And please title some pages, Handbook for My Son, Handbook for My Daughter, okay? Let's start with premarital, what we wish would have been done differently, or if we could train our youth to do so. I'll talk to you later about how we're going to integrate this to your lives now. But before the first spring, before the seeds go into the ground, there needs to be some significant soil prep. We all start this life being dependent on our parents or our caretakers. It is the hope of all parents to prepare and empower us each to be strong and independent in our early young adult years in preparation for healthy and happy marriages. We build upon the love of our parents to become emotionally and psychologically strong so that we don't jump into long-term relationships in desperation. Now, none of us did that, right? We were so mature, none of us jumped into relationships out of desperation because we were absolutely emotionally, psychologically strong and independent from our parents, or not. In this perfect world, we each will have built the foundation of a relationship with God, His Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost before we get into a serious relationship with another person. Now, this is very brief, but in your handbook for your daughter or handbook for your son, please take this page here as a starting point for you to elaborate on the psychological, emotional, spiritual fortitude you would prefer for your loved ones to have before they enter a serious relationship with another person. Okay, there's your first homework assignment if you would like to take full advantage of this learning opportunity. Okay, do that.
Okay, so the question came in that is, what do you do if you realize after you were married that your soil preparation was inadequate? And
that is a perfect.
There's another one that kind of goes along that maybe I'll throw out here too. is, what if, oh, I can't find it now. There's a few questions in here, but what about for people who are newly married and don't have, how does this apply, this cycle apply to someone who is in a new relationship and has very little experience with relationships?
All right, thank you for that. In fact, the next slide will help me answer both of those questions. You see, I want to give you a little secret. Those of you who are thinking, geez, man, I am a mess, or I find myself in a mess. The secret is all of us were too immature to get married, okay? I don't know, maybe there's one of you out there that can raise your hand and say, except me, I was the only one on the planet who did my entire soil preparation correctly. If you're one of those people, please write a book and sell it. You'll be a millionaire within a year. All right, because the rest of us would like to learn how to do this. Observe on the left-hand side. Okay, this is my amazingly glamorous demonstration of human development in relationships. Feel free, you techno-savvy people, to be jealous of my skills in drawings. The lower rectangle represents a dependent relationship. This is all of us, whether we like it or not. When we're born, we are dependent on another person. Whether they're good at being parents or not isn't really the question. It's what we get stuck with. But the ideal dynamic is we move from being dependent up the scale to being independent, as I described before. Okay, I am capable of functioning on my own psychologically. I'm capable of functioning on my own financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay, once we get into independent, as you can see, this is where I've got a little diagram. Yes, there's an overlap on these diagrams on purpose. I'll explain why in a little bit. Okay. Once you enter independent, you are now in a position to experience season one. Season one is where two independent people meet each other. Now, they don't have to be completely independent. There's usually some flaw there. But as you might guess, when you see someone of the opposite sex who's very independent, they are pretty solid spiritually, they're pretty solid emotionally, psychologically, financially, etc. They tend to be attractive. It's true the other way around as well. When another person is independent, psychologically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, they are attractive. These people are attracted to each other. And so the opportunity to enter season one begins. If it keeps growing through what we're going to describe in a minute, verbal, cognitive, emotional, psychological, and spiritual intimacies, it will transition into season two for a while and experience what we call interdependency, where it's an enjoyable, well-oiled machine, okay? And then it will fall apart, because we all do. Some people fall apart 3 hours after the wedding. Some people fall apart 3 days after the wedding. Some 3 weeks, some 3 months, some 3 years. And then we go through season 4 again. But the reason I want you to see this early in our conversation today is way too many people panic because they see the leaves falling off the trees in their relationships and things get cold for a while. And according to people who have false principles, it's automatically only going to get worse. I really want you to gain some confidence tonight that when the leaves fall off the trees and there's some snow, it's just preparation for the next spring. It's just preparation for the next spring. Yeah, you may not have this slide in yours. I added it because someone was asking me questions. Go ahead and screenshot it while you're sitting there, and you can have access to this one as well. Okay, before we enter the next phase of building a relationship, it's really important that I address a word that is very misunderstood in our culture. And it's not just our LDS culture, it's the United States culture. The word is intimacy, or in other words, being intimate. If you're a regular person who's been around for a little while, you've heard people use this word as a nice, pleasant way of saying we participated in a sexual interaction, okay? In order to understand how relationships really grow, you need to know that the actual definition of the word intimacy is to integrate or intertwine one or more things. We're going to be talking about several different types of intimacy and how they build upon each other and how they intertwine and interconnect with each other in order to build as a series of rebar entwinements on each layer of a foundation so that the top layer will not tip over. In our experience, we humans, people from America have a tendency to be very impatient with the building process. and we can build very fast, and then we wonder why the structure topples over. So what you're about to see is called the intimacy pyramid, and it's not about sex. The intimacy pyramid is about how to build strong connections at different levels in the correct order, so that the season 2 or the honeymoon phase or the summer phase of a relationship will last longer and longer and longer each time. All right. Yes, I know this is extremely small print. Okay. That's why we sent you a link to these so you can zoom in on it at your own speed. Please be patient with what might seem to be oversimplification. All right. But it's not. In the same way that it's by small and simple things are great things brought to pass, these principles have been carefully studied and reviewed for 30 years now before we present them to you tonight. The first phase of any relationship that's going to be healthy is called verbal intimacy. Verbal intimacy is just the ability to have a conversation about just about anything that doesn't matter, about the weather, about sports, about music, about all sorts of things that are not deep and complex. And both the speaker and the listener rejoice and are edified together. You see, if you haven't noticed, human communication is very challenging. How many times have you said something and the other person's response makes you feel like you just ate sauerkraut? You're going, what? What did you think I just said? What do you think what? Where are you coming from with that? How many times has the other person said something and you're like, what? Human beings actually prefer to communicate in an edifying way, but most of us are not capable because it's actually really hard. It's actually really hard. And when I was first studying this, again, a spiritual principle superseded and overpowered everything I learned in school. A simple phrase that I learned as a missionary: if you don't have the Spirit, don't teach. I'm all, oh, okay. All right. It never occurred to me that you could say, if you don't have the Spirit, don't talk. Now, this might shock some of you. I actually had a couple I was teaching this to in therapy. And I says, listen, I spent like 45 minutes, an hour talking about the science of having, why this Holy Ghost needs to be present while you're talking to clarify communication. There's an article called the Tetris puzzle piece, or rather the best place to find it. Each of you will be provided with a link for our marriage repair workshops and Lazarus lectures. There's a whole chapter on something called the Tetris puzzle piece communication principle, where it clarifies how the Holy Ghost will take words and twist them and slide them so that it makes more sense to the listener than when you're speaking. Now, I was talking to this one couple and I says, really, it's time for the two of you to apply. If you don't have the Spirit, don't talk. And they both said to me, then we would never talk. And I'm all, wow. Okay, you know, as a therapist, you're not supposed to have that like shocked facial expression. You're supposed to go, oh, okay, that's lovely. Now, here's another thing I challenge you. If you don't have the Spirit, don't listen. Now, don't keep it a secret. Like if the other person's talking, some of you are professionals at this. Some of you are really good at not listening while you look like you're listening. Nod with me if you know how to look like you're listening when you're not actually listening. Okay, yeah, all right. If you're good at that, it's your responsibility to inform the speaker that you've lost the spirit of listening and say, you know what? I would venture to say the things that are coming out of your mouth are very important right now, but I currently do not have the presence of mind to value what you're saying. So I'm going to go regather the Holy Ghost so I can actually listen to you with all of my heart, might, mind, and strength. It is my hope that you experience during verbal intimacy a pleasurable, edifying experience so that you actually want to go to the next one. If you are not able to experience verbal intimacy, please do not even try to go into the next ones. I got a lot of cheaters in my office. They're like, we tried for 7 minutes to have verbal intimacy. It failed, so we skipped it. So I want you to go back to the pyramid and imagine what that would look like if you built a building where the bottom layer did not work, so you started building the next layer on top of it. Do we have any engineers out there that go, you know what, that might not work? Now, one of the questions I usually get at this point is, what if it takes us a year or two actually to get good at verbal intimacy so we can actually talk when it's edifying? Well, then it's going to take a year or two. All right. And it's always fun when you try to explain how it's the other person's fault. You know, we could have verbal intimacy if it wasn't for them. You just need to know what's wrong with them. I never make a mistake in this, but they sure do. Okay, we can spend 2 hours on that topic. We're not going to go there today. Okay, so let's pretend that you actually are able as a team to create a verbal intimate environment. Before we walk in this, I just want you to know already, you're going to feel a degree of depression or sadness because ain't none of us actually succeeding at this as much as we're about to describe. I'm showing you principle-based relationships, and then we're going to talk about what to do when it doesn't work and how to re-enter the growth cycle so that you can build and build and build and build towards it.
How about, is it possible for, I know we're kind of on the intimacy cycle right now, but we're cross-referencing everything. Is it possible for a couple to be in different seasons at the same time?
There's another one here I just looked at that came in. How can individuals in a couple continue to grow independently without outgrowing each other? That one's a really good one that we will address. Parents don't set a good example. Good. To be in different seasons. All right. Thank you, everyone, for cooperating with us by using this questioning tool, because it really makes it easier for me to incorporate your questions in our conversation. Many of the answers will come together near the end of the visit today. Okay, if we zoom in on this paragraph on the right-hand side, I'm using this term a little different than is familiar to most people. Cognitive intimacy is the ability to think together primarily about the future. Do you have the ability with each other to talk about the future in a way that keeps the Holy Ghost present? We're going to be building on that over and over and over again. Let me give you a tool for how to communicate about the future and possibly the past in a way that keeps the Spirit present. This is called the 4-square listening tool. If you have a piece of paper nearby, draw a line down the middle, a line down the middle the other way, one up and down, one left and right. Okay. Top left corner. Now, some of you have loved ones that will take notes for you because you don't need to, because your brain remembers everything. All right. Isn't that nice that you never have to take notes because someone else will? And then you can just ask them, you know what, those notes you took the other day, how about I read them? And they say, I didn't take notes on what you needed to remember. I thought you were going to be in charge of yourself because you're an independent note taker. All right. Now, those of you who are not taking notes, please write a book on how to be so amazingly capable of memorizing everything that you don't have to take notes because you can remember. I am amazed. Actually, there are some people like that. I'm not one of them. And those of you who are not taking notes, I'm not guilting or shaming you, because that would be inappropriate for a therapist to do that. So if you're feeling any negative feelings, I'm not causing them. Okay. Drawing a line down the middle of the page, the right-hand side, left and right, top left corner. Things my spouse says that I disagree with. Things my spouse, by the way, if there's any teenagers or youth present, this does work on parents. Okay. Things my spouse says that I disagree with. Seems strange to be taking notes on what you disagree with, but I can guarantee you scientifically, if you don't write it down, it'll get stuck in your head, okay? Like kidney stones, all right? And you can't get them out, and they clog up everything. Top right-hand corner, things you could say that probably will not help. Things you could say that probably will not help. When I'm doing a small meeting, this square fills up really fast. Oh, I can think of a lot of things to say right now that will probably not help. Okay. Now, I'm being playful with you, but scientifically speaking, these 2 squares are absolutely vital. Okay. You must write things down because it will contaminate your listening skills and it will completely obliterate cognitive and emotional intimacy, because we can tell when you think about something other than what this person's talking about. Bottom left square. This one is really dynamic to fill in. Things my spouse says that might be inspired. Can you imagine your spouse saying something that's inspired? Who knew that that's even a possibility? Bottom right corner, something some things you could say that could be inspired. I challenge you, in every conversation with your loved one, you find at least one thing to add to the conversation that is probably inspired. Because if all you have is something from the top 2 squares to talk about, we're never going to be able to have a Holy Ghost laced conversation. A relationship, a healthy and happy relationship, will start with verbal intimacy, where people can talk in a way that is edifying to each other, and then they will be able to talk about future hopes and dreams, short-term, long-term, in a way that is edifying and uplifting. When the other person suggests a ridiculous idea, like, I have a business plan that's going to make millions of dollars, the response is edifying and uplifting. When the other person says, I'm worried about one of our kids and their future, the response is edifying and uplifting. Okay? If it's not, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, of what to do when things don't go right. But for now, we're talking about the perfect dynamic. How long are the seasons? Anywhere between 37 seconds and 37 years. There's the answer to that one. Okay? Somewhere between 37 seconds and 37 years. All right. There, I got that one answered. Next one. Next season. Emotional intimacy. Now, this is another one of those levels of marital development that is a little bit unusual use of the word emotional. Most complex emotional conversations are going to be about the past. We're going to be talking about the past before we got married. We're going to be talking about the past while we've been married. We're going to be talking about what you did wrong. We're going to be talking about what I did wrong. If we're going to get through some of the most agonizing portions of relationship development, we're going to have to get good at keeping the Holy Ghost present while we're talking about the past. It is true that a high percentage of our marriage therapy work is done in this layer, because there's lots of congestion, lots of complexities, and we need you to get better and better at it. There's a link there for you to study. It's a 30-minute audio for you to study and get better at building emotional intimacy. All right, if you have verbal, if you can do cognitive, you can do emotional. If you can't, then you're gonna have to go into season 3, and we're gonna talk about that in a minute. But if you are able to maintain some season 1 growth, you get to reach into psychological intimacy. Psychological intimacy is the experience of integrating and synergizing ideas, plans, and efforts in an edifying way. You bring thoughts, they bring thoughts. We mix some of your thoughts, we mix some of their thoughts. We start coming up with an idea, and it's better than they would have been by themselves. Many of the couples I've met, or many of the couples I never meet, drift into what we call a survivable cohabitation, where they've given up on psychological intimacy. There's very little strategizing, planning together. I'm grateful that those relationships stay alive. I mean, they're functional, but I don't know that that's where God wanted things to be left off at. Neither is the man without the woman, nor the woman without the man, and the Lord is not intended to be a physical thing. It is a psychological thing. The amazing things that women bring to the table, in harmony with the amazing things men bring to the table, if integrated, intertwined, if you can create a psychological intimacy, many glorious things can happen. But I promise you, if you do it right with ambition, you will hit things you can't figure out. You will run into things like, we've got a daughter who has developmental things that are glitching. I've never seen this before. You've never seen this before. The husband says, I'm in over my head. The wife says, I'm in over my head. And they find themselves like unto Moses standing next to the Red Sea and saying, we do not have a logical answer. We're going to need revelation. James chapter 1, verse 5 applies. And as a team, intimately together, they say, we lack wisdom. So let us ask of God. And may I tell you, and I hope that some of you have experienced this at least once in your life, when you receive revelation with your favorite teammate, you will experience a version of intimacy that is above and beyond anything you're ever going to experience in a bedroom. Psychological and spiritual intimacy is absolutely off the charts when it comes to the joy and pleasure that can come into people's lives. Okay? The reason we put physical intimacy at the top instead of near the bottom is because everything I've ever seen in human relations there's nothing to talk about when it comes to physical intimacy, because if you have all of those built, it flows in a beautiful way. It flows nicely. I want you to see where I've drawn a very small black line. Do you see how the verbal, cognitive, emotional, the one above that actually, Hallie, above spiritual? Okay. Can you see how when you've reached that, that is where crossing into interdependent really takes place in its deepest fashion. That's season 2, is when you've built a nice structure. You know, when I was a youth and I was asking, why do they make such a big deal about withholding physical intimacy before the wedding? Like, what's the deal with that? Why are they being so rigid? Why are they being so cruel? And now that you've had a few years behind you, you understand yourselves. You want your loved ones to work more on verbal, more cognitive, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, because if you race to physical intimacy, you now have a standing up stick that is top heavy, and it will crash. It's not a pyramid, it's just going to crash. So season 1 is what we've spent most of our time on so far, where we meet and we begin verbal intimacy after having gotten a good foundation. Cognitive, emotional, psychological, spiritual. Please look these over carefully. Yes, I know that I've given you very little detail on them. If you would like a very thorough review of these principles, follow the links that are connected to the marriage repair workshop, and we can give you weeks of training on each one of these line items. But for now, we hope to add value to your lives with just this. And then the intimacies grow, then they start to fall apart. And we're going to talk about seasons 3 and seasons 4 next.
Here's one more about emotional intimacy. But what happens when you no longer feel emotionally attractive to your spouse? I'm rarely listened to without being cut off and told how I feel.
Okay. I will address that one as we go through season 4. So thank you for putting that on the table. Okay, we're going to try to make sure we have time to get through all these, and I do believe we will be able to. Okay, you've now seen how it's supposed to be. It's very important for us to realize it pretty much never is the way it's supposed to be. So we've got to have a plan. And this is why I'm so grateful for God's approach to things, where he already knows things are going to die. He already knows that mirrors are going to break. He already knows you're going to sin. He already knows that you lack wisdom. So he built an entire system designed to accommodate that. When we fall and the relationship is a mess, think of what it's like if you are an athlete or a musician and you're practicing for something and you mess up and you make a mistake and you get hurt and it doesn't go the way you plan. What usually happens, what often happens that leads couples into my office, is their desperation for maintaining connection causes there to be a collapse. Well, he hurt me first. No, she hurt me first. No, he hurt me first. She hurt me first. Blah, blah, blah. It does not go anywhere. When things fall apart, think about how you would train your kids in your handbook for your children. What do you say to them after they strike out? What do you say to them after they lose a wrestling match? What do you say to them after they embarrass themselves with their violin or other musical instrument? What do you say to them? Okay. You say to them, let's regroup. Now, we have been blessed by a prophet who has wisdom way beyond any scientist I've ever met. I have been studying the principles of human and relationship recovery for 30 years, and 18 months ago, he came out with a very simple 4-step process of rebuilding relationships that's better than anything I've ever come across. I've tried to make it very obvious that I've plagiarized this, so it's not actually plagiarism. Okay, so I'm showing you exactly where this comes from. If you follow the links that's been given there, it'll take you right to your gospel library for a pattern of growth that President Nelson and his men have tucked into the youth program 18 months ago. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because there's plenty of information on it in your in the Pattern for Growth handbook. First, we discover. We do some discovery, so let's apply this to what we've been talking about. We take a scientific approach to what has gone wrong. We got these pieces in place. We pull out the intimacy triangle, the intimacy pyramid, and we start talking about, we were doing fine until this. We were doing fine until this. We were doing fine until this. And we discover what went wrong. We do some research on some different tools and techniques that might be used to make it better. We read this, we read that, we study this, we study that. Okay. And then we make a plan. We make a plan. I'm going to do this. Now, by the way, I strongly recommend this is done by yourself, not with your spouse. That might surprise you. When you review what goes wrong for quite some time, it's more important that you study what you did wrong to avoid the molten bean principle. One of the most frustrating things in marriage therapy is when both spouses come to my office and they spend their whole time sharing with me their discovery of what their spouse did wrong. I don't need to know what your spouse did wrong. I need to know what you did wrong. And then when you get that blank face, like, I don't think I did anything wrong. In sports, we call this film review. Okay. But I don't need to see the film of somebody else on the football field. I need to see the film of you. But I never do anything wrong. Back to James chapter or Ether 12:27. You might want to call up God and see if you're actually clear on that one. Then you make a plan. You make a very detailed plan. You compose a plan. You review that plan. When my husband says this, instead of what I used to say, I'm going to say this instead. When my child says this, instead of doing this, I'm going to do this instead. You make a plan. You write down the plan. Then you try it out for a while, a day or two or three. Then you reflect on it. It's like reviewing the film again. You go, okay, what went right? What went wrong? And then you go back to discover and you do it again. Discover, plan, act, reflect. Discover, plan, act, reflect. This tool is so powerful. I'm using it in almost every therapy session I have, whether it's with a single person or married person. Do not underestimate the power of this. Please practice it on your own. If you're struggling to learn how to apply it, just make contact with one of our coaches and we will teach you how to apply it. I want to address one of the questions that came up a little bit. Something about growing at different paces. What if one person grows differently than another? I'm going to give the answer to that here. There is a history of many stories in the scriptures of men going up into the mountains. We are aware of Moses going up into the mountain. We are aware of Lehi and Nephi going into the mountain. Enos went up into the mountain. The brother of Jared went up into the mountain. The idea behind that is that they are going up to commune with God. They're going up to get revelation. You're not going to get through these things if you don't re-access a personal connection with God. When I was thinking for myself about the work that a man and a woman would be doing away from each other, the concern about them drifting apart, God put his hand on my shoulder and says, take a second to think that through, Maurice. I'm all, what do you mean take a second to think it through? So if a man comes to me and says, give me guidance, give me direction, give me insight, give me revelation, help me be born again and become a better man. If a woman comes to me with the same question by herself, I would like to be your daughter. I would like to be in harmony with you. I would like, as God was talking to me about this, he's all, if a husband and a wife both come to me, do you think I have the ability to orchestrate their development in a way that will put them in better harmony with each other as they work through this? My friends, I've heard many times people panicking over the idea of a 5-minute separation, a 5-hour separation, a 5-day separation. How long was Moses and his wife separated from each other? Of course, if either one of them unplugs from God, if he says, you know what, I'm not really into this following God thing, it's kind of not really my thing anymore. If she says the same, not really my thing, it's not really something I want to do anymore. I've seen people even be afraid of ending a conversation. Like, we can't even stop talking or else it's over. As soon as we stop talking, it's the death of our relationship. It's over. If you walk away, it's the end of our relationship. We're getting a divorce for sure. If you don't stay here and keep talking to me, then it's over. If your relationship is falling apart just for a few minutes, okay, maybe everything was fine an hour and a half ago, but there was a little bit of a misunderstanding on how to handle things with this teenager, or whether to put green balls or blue on the tree. Even in our sacred ceremony, the latest revisions have strongly emphasized the importance of having your relationship with God supersede your relationship with your spouse. Okay? That one ceremony that is the longest ceremony we participate in is about you and God directly. And then there's a brief ceremony thereafter that connects you to your spouse. It might seem ironic, it might seem paradoxical, but the most important thing we've discovered in creating healthy and happy relationships is the work the man and the woman do when they're not together. The most important thing we have discovered is the work that a man and a woman do when they're not together. God has given us a blessing that we don't have to be perfect to get our relationship airplane off the ground. We can find and discover enough principles. We can do enough verbal intimacy, enough cognitive, emotional, psychological, and spiritual that we can get the airplane off the ground. But if one of those Wright brothers came to you and says, you see that? That airplane can stay off the ground for at least 100 yards, sometimes 200 yards. How about you get on in my airplane and we'll cross the Pacific Ocean? And you're like, no. A few weeks ago, I was traveling across the country with my daughter to one of her dance conventions. And I had a really weird awareness that I was relaxing on an airplane. I was about to take a nap on a device that was man-made, that was going to go 500 to 700 miles per hour, 7 miles above the ground, and I wasn't worried about it crashing. Why can I rest my brain like that? We are told in the scriptures, you will be blessed according to the principles that you follow. Okay? This is a scientific concept, not just religious. The more principles that you discover and apply to your relationship, the more secure and stable it will be. While I was trying to weasel my way out of another stewardship, because that's the tendency of me and several other men that I know, I was doing the thing I do where I listen to conference talks or other edifying literature, and I was slightly bothered to hear David O. McKay tell me what it was going to be like for me to stand before God. And I'm all, okay, he's going to ask me if I was a really good therapist. No. He's going to ask me if I was really good at mowing the lawn for my neighbors. No. Good at teaching elders quorum? No. Apparently, brethren, when we stand before God, one of the very first questions he's going to ask is, how well did you take care of my daughter? In my terminology, how hard did you work to learn how to build an airplane that she could rest and relax in? Brigham Young prophesied that the most dangerous thing that could happen to our culture is that we would prosper. When it comes to human psychology, what is meant by that is it's good enough that we don't have to work on it anymore. It's good enough. I don't have to work on it anymore. It's fine. There's enough duct tape on that airplane. It should be able to get at least to St. George before it crashes. Okay? And if it does, babe, I will say nice things at your funeral.
And there was a question that came in about the spending time with God. What if the spouse does walk away from God while in that separation? Can that still be okay? We can still keep working and hope the other person comes around?
I watched a few relationships in my developmental years. My grandfather never quite bought into the whole gospel principles thing. His wife experienced a lot of agony with that. They were able to build a decent airplane with the number of principles they were able to agree on. So they did some good. The amount of good was good enough that grandma didn't think it was wise to end the relationship. It's an agonizing decision whether or not to abandon ship or to stay in it. It's another piece of our work. We spend a lot of time helping people clarify, in the end, how much difficulty can an individual handle? It's not my place to answer that. Whether or not to chop off Laban's head or to kill a marriage, it's not my place to answer that one either. Our job is to teach correct principles and help you feel confident in your decisions as you receive personal revelation to clarify the application of the principles in your life. So I'm reading one here that says, what if my spouse and I no longer have, aside from gospel and kids, in common? What now? You have to choose. You have to choose whether to fly in an airplane that's pretty wobbly or whether it's time to take a stand. Sometimes when one person says, I'm going there, I'm going to the promised land, I'm reintegrating everything, the other person decides to jump on board with them. Other times they decide to go away. Either way, we want your brain and your heart and your spirit to be ready. You said there are two falsehood beliefs of people overcoming difficulties. One's talking about it more, spending time together. Can you expound on these? When you have two people who are in need of revelation to fulfill their stewardship, so as they go through season 1 and season 2, they've helped things grow and become as good as they can with their current level of wisdom and knowledge. The mistake that we see making happen is when they start to fall, instead of going to God first and refueling and refilling their wagon, their life wagon, and realigning their wisdom, they start talking with old brains. And now it usually looks like people duct taping airplanes instead of revising them and rebuilding them. In order for a marriage to be ready for the next phase of life, it often has to be taken apart a bit, a new blueprint created, a new birth to the relationship. So a born again marriage will not be like the marriage as it was before. So if you start talking too soon, before both of you go get revelations on your side of the improvement, it usually makes a mess of things. Do all relationships have to go through these cycles? Why? Because there's no such thing as two humans who can run the three-legged sack race perfectly from the time they're 22 years old. All relationships will collapse at some point because of individual human development. But don't worry, it doesn't have to be a crash and burn. You can actually land the airplane without it crashing and revamp it and revise it. So it doesn't have to be a catastrophe. All right? It doesn't have to be horrific, but it does require each individual to retreat, regroup, reconnect themselves with God. The man must become a better man through personal revelation. The woman must become a better woman through personal revelation before you walk into the intimacies again. Okay? If you want it to be strong. What if your parents don't set a good example of a good marriage or abused as a child? This one is common, more common than we thought. This is where it is vital that you release yourself from the previous education. It falls in that category of false teachings. And you must withdraw from the way the world talks about it. I promise you, there's a way more information in those conference talks than you might have found before. Everything I've learned about healthy science in psychology is from conference talks, combined with scriptures, with just a tiny bit of stuff from the textbooks. They teach it really as hard as they can, but they're like 10 to 20 years behind. Everything the scientists are teaching is behind. What is my marriage? What if my marriage is kind of not great and my spouse doesn't seem interested in improving it because he or she is too busy for anything else? All right. What seems to work best for this is you get yourself anxiously engaged in personal development, as well as allowing for the possibility, the strain that usually puts. Imagine you're crossing the plains and you're moving forward, you're moving forward, you're moving forward. All right. Often the other person says, where are you going? I'd like to go with you. Sometimes they don't. Now, that decision of whether or not to keep going to the promised land without them or wait for them can only be answered by personal prayer. Okay, this is part of your season 4 work. And yes, I have many couples I've worked with where they feel inspired to stay in Nebraska and build a mud hut with this person. And that is the best that they're going to have. And others feel inspired to continue moving on without their spouse and build something in the future. I am not entitled to that revelation for you, but me and my team are more than happy to help you process it. Those are difficult decisions. What if two people are completely opposite different? Is there hope of getting psychological intimacy? Absolutely. Because we're all different, and some very different, because there's no such thing as the exact opposite of somebody else. And quite commonly, the God we work with can do amazing things with counterpoint. I know a few of you are musicians out there, and you know exactly what I'm talking about with counterpoint. When you're dealing with a God, he can do amazingly cool things with things that look like they don't mix well. But you're going to have to do the appropriate approach to your season 4 work in order to pull that off. But both people have to do it. What would be an example of rebirth and regrowth? Let me just give you a short version of that. When I got married, I assumed that a wife should be fun and cute. Never occurred to me that a woman could be smart. I know that's embarrassing. I only had brothers. My mother was a farm girl from Idaho. It never occurred to me that women could be smart and phenomenally insightful. Don't throw things at me. That's why we're doing this on screen, so you can't throw things at me. After my marriage almost died, I went to God and said, what am I supposed to do with this? He's all, well, if you'll come at it with a whole new vision, I can show you some really cool things. And I had to learn how to work closely with a smart and insightful woman. And it allowed for the rebirth of my marriage because I learned how to do that. Is it possible for a couple to be in different seasons? No. No, you cannot be in different seasons. You might feel ready for, like, you can be in season 1. I guess you could be if you are really good at, like, imagining where you are. Like, if you're really good at, like, saying, I am in season 2, I'm having the best time ever, and the other person's over there by themselves in season 4, and you're like, we're having a blast, aren't we? And they're like, I guess so. I mean, I guess you could do that. I've never seen it in my life. What if my spouse is a narcissist? Can God change them? Is God capable of raising Lazarus from the dead? Is God capable of changing a narcissist? What is human psychology too much work for God? The problem, though, is by definition, a narcissist doesn't really want to be changed. Now, I do challenge the term narcissist is used way too often clinically. Okay, someone may have narcissistic characteristics, but that does not automatically make them a narcissist. If they ever show any signs of compassion, then they're disqualified from being a narcissist. And there are some other things that disqualify them. What if collapsed for years and both exhausted? If you're both exhausted, then you really, really, really need to spend time in season 4. Go spend time with, now season 4 doesn't mean just go fishing by yourself and doing nothing useful and productive. Season 4 doesn't mean just getting away from people. Season 4 means you take a journey with God. According to the New Testament, he is the well of living life. He is the source of rejuvenation. He is the source of empowerment. And every time a man or a woman feels correctly and thoroughly rejuvenated by God, he always says it's time for you to get back to work. And your marriage will be the next thing we work on. He may give you some unique revelations, but that's the most common I've seen. What about when there's unintentional emotional abuse in marriage? How does this apply to this? So when there is abuse taking place, when there's some type of unfortunate negative dynamic, we must break the cycle. So that would be classified as the fall. Whenever one person behaves in a way that is out of harmony with the spirit once or more, then it is time to enter season 4. There's a lot of details to enter season 4. When we do our trainings in the Marriage Repair Workshop, we spend 2 months discussing how to do season 4 correctly, all right? Which includes how to break the cycle of an abusive relationship. The short version of it is withdraw to a safe distance. Get out of reach of the abuser. Get out of reach of the abuser. What does that mean is the most common question. It means get far enough away that you can't hear them or see them so that they can't abuse you. And yes, that could have a long-term impact on your marriage. What if our spouse refuses to believe that he or she has work to do? If you're in season 4, that will usually break the pattern. What has been your experience when a spouse completely freaks out of the first fall and doesn't believe there's any coming back? If you re-anchor yourself with God, it's sad and scary when the other person does that. Usually they aren't used to scary things, or they haven't learned how to have psychological security around things. Just anchor yourself. We use a lot of the rock climbing analogy. Just anchor yourself to the God and the gospel principles and ride the wave and let them re-anchor themselves, and we'll see what happens if they do so. All right, I hope that what we've shared with you tonight is useful. I'm clearly aware that it is inadequate. Please take your notes and the notes we've given you and ponder and get revelation. If your revelation is adequate and you have what you need, then proceed with confidence.